Hey, good evening, Mount Vernon Church family, and good to have you here. We are doing our Wednesday night Bible study devotional. We've got our prayer time that I hope you have your email. Thanks to Jimmy and Nancy for getting that together and doing that for us. So check your email when you watch this, and you'll hopefully have that list with you that you can go through and pray. Which brings us to the topic of tonight. It is prayer. I know the angle, it looks like you're looking up at me for my computer camera. But it brings us to the topic of prayer tonight. There are a lot of hindrances to prayer. And sometimes I'll ask myself, well, why do people not pray? Why do I not pray? What keeps me from praying? Not on purpose, but what keeps me from praying? Sometimes it's time, the schedule that I have, or sometimes it's I just don't really know what we're doing or what we're praying for, or it's just a name on the list. But let me encourage you. I know we have a lot of names on our list that I'm still finding out who they are and what their relation is to our church and the families and the extended family. So let me encourage you, as you get your prayer list, to pray, to not be hindered by you don't know who it is or your time schedule. Take time to stop, get away, or spend time with someone and just sit down and go over the names and pray as the Lord leads you. And you may not know what the concern is, but God does. But we are commanded and called and challenged and encouraged to pray for one another. But the hindrances to prayer, it may be more than just the time and not really knowing what it is. If you did a Google search like I did, just to say, what are some of the hindrances, the top 10 list, the top 7, the top 3, 4 hindrances, 4 roadblocks and stuff like that, you'll find a whole bunch of articles about what keeps people from praying or why people don't pray. Well, just to name a few: sin in your life, sin, not walking in fellowship with God, that is a huge hindrance to prayer. Maybe like the Jonah syndrome, to where, I don't want to pray because, oh my goodness, I know I'm not right with God. Another reason that people fail to pray is they fail to spend time in the Word of God. Not reading the Word of God enough, not spending time in the Bible is a hindrance to prayer. Sometimes people fail to pray in faith. They just pray, not really believing what they say. Well, God, I guess I'll just say this and hope for the best. A lack of faith. Some people ask because they fail to ask God because of a spirit of self-dependence. Well, I've got this. I don't need help. I can do this. Or maybe be a reluctant to ask God because, well, I'm supposed to do this on my own. Some people fail to pray because they don't ask from the right motive. That's a hindrance. They failed. The hindrance is that their motives are not godly. They're not biblical. They're not scriptural. They're not from the heart. Their motives are wrong for praying. They want to pray for their gain and not for God's will. Other ones that I have listed here are, oh my goodness, their relations with people. If your relationships with people, they're wrong, then that's a big hindrance. For example, an unforgiving spirit. If you just have a hatred or an anger towards somebody, that's a big hindrance to prayer. Pretentious praying, which is praying to impress people. Let me figure out and maybe Google a really good, well-worded, impressive prayer. That's not from your heart or your spirit. That's pretentious. You're trying to impress people. That's a main hindrance. Repetition, vain repetition, and rituals, just doing it for the sake of doing it, not really from your heart. You see, this is the heart issue that we're going through. And then one that I found in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7, that is when there's domestic problems, family problems going on in the home. Boy, that can be a huge hindrance to prayer. Ignoring what's right in front of you and not taking that on and giving that to the Lord and trying to do it yourself and ignoring it and just making it worse. Boy, I've made things worse that way. And then this one for tonight, a big hindrance to prayer is prayerlessness in itself. Just failing to pray. I'm just not going to pray. That right there, failure to pray, is a huge hindrance. In the Old Testament, 1 Samuel Samuel was talking to the people and they were asking him to pray. In chapter 12, he responds to them, of course I'm going to pray. He says, moreover, as for me, far be it from me, God forbid, that I should sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you. And I will instruct you in the good and right way. So even Samuel was teaching us, but we need to pray. That if we don't pray, my goodness, that is a huge hindrance, just saying, well, I'm just not going to pray. So that may be the big hindrance that we see today, is just not praying. We need to stop. We need, as we'll see, and at the end of this, I'll give you a little bit of tip that was given to me years ago, 18, 20 years ago. But we just need to stop and pray. Stop and pray. And don't just say, well, I'll just do it later, or I'll do it at the end of the day, or I'll do it tomorrow, or I need to hurry up and get to church Wednesday and so we can have prayer. Pray where you are. Stop and pray. Don't let failure to pray be the big hindrance to praying. That sounds silly, but that is. Hey, here's a passage for tonight. Matthew chapter 26 is where we'll be tonight. This is where Jesus takes disciples with him, and they go to the Garden of the Gethsemane to do what? To pray. And we're going to see a hindrance to prayer was they just didn't pray. They let their flesh overtake them. They fell asleep. They just didn't pray. That was a huge hindrance. So here we are in Matthew chapter 26, verses 36 through 46. I'm going to read 11 verses here, but the key verses are verse 40 and 41 about praying. Let me read that to you. Matthew 26, verse 36. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me. And going on a little further, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, so you could not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, my Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done. And again, he came and found the disciples sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for a third time, saying the same words again. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, sleep and take your rest later on, because see, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. This is that scene, This is the event, the scene to where they're in the garden and Jesus is praying before he is arrested and taken and beaten and put on trial and crucified. And this is that scene right here in the Garden of the Gethsemane. And Jesus he's confronting death, but he stood alone. His closest friends neglected him. As we see here in verse 40, he says he came to the disciples after he arose from his prayer. He went to the three who were supposed to be praying with him, supposed to be in that spirit of prayer, supposed to be in that time of comfort, supposed to be there with him, wrestling with him. He found them asleep, and he was left alone by himself, neglected. So he came and he found them neglecting him. And he said in verse 40, he came and he found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, so you could not watch with me 1 hour. He arose from prayer and he found them sleeping. They neglected him. His closest friends had failed to pray with him. The second thing that we see, that they were asleep. The second part of that is verse 40. Says, he said to Peter, so you cannot watch with me 1 hour. Verse 41, watch and pray. Here's a warning that Jesus is giving the disciples. He's giving them the warning of temptation is coming. So he says, watch and pray Watch and pray that you may not enter in temptation, because the spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak. The disciples had failed to pray for Jesus, but Jesus is making sure that they don't fail to pray for themselves because of the temptation. Christ said two things. He said, watch and pray. Watch and pray. Both of these are important. Watchfulness implies it's seeing. We need to see, watch. So tonight's two words are watch and pray. Watch and pray. We need to see, and praying implies preparing. We need to watch in order to see temptation coming. He's warning them of temptation, and we can learn from this is those temptations that are coming, trials and temptations. We need to watch and pray. The people on our list, we need to pray for them, see what they're going through the best we can. We need to watch and pray. Watch in order to see the temptation coming, and pray in order to prepare when that temptation strikes. We need to watch and pray. So Christ was warning after he rose and found them sleeping. He warns them of temptation. You need to pray for yourselves so that you may not fall into temptation. But he also warns them about the flesh and the spirit, and how the flesh is weak. They were sleeping because of the emotional strain, the distress of the evening. It just overwhelmed them. Luke says in Luke chapter 22, I think verse 45, Luke says that they were asleep because of sorrow. It's just so much had been going on. The evening was shocking to them, the things that had just happened. It was taxing. They were fatigued. They were weary. They were preoccupied. And so concentrating on prayer was pretty difficult. It was tough. Everything that has happened just got to the best of them. Their flesh was stronger than their spirit, because he just told them, indeed, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So watch and pray so that you do not enter into temptation. Watch to see the temptations coming, and pray to prepare for when those temptations strike. Church family, we need to watch and pray. The two mistakes that we see that the disciples made here is, one, they were dependent on their own wisdom and strength instead of God's spirit for whatever battle was coming. I do that. And I think if we pushed or dug a little bit, you probably do that too. You depend on your own wisdom, what you know, what you think needs to be done. You depend on your own strength. I can do this. I can get through this. Not just when we're tired, but whenever temptations arise, whenever these things are happening. Hey, a side note, I just did a little lesson for the high school boys where my kids go. And I was talking about the armor of God. I mentioned the armor of God, Ephesians chapter 6, and I believe it's verse 16 or verse 18, talking about the breastplate of righteousness. And when we have those temptations and those thoughts and those things that are coming, quickly what I want to do is I want to do right to counterattack the temptations that are coming. If something is telling me to do something wrong, or I'm tempted to give in, man, I want to do good. I want to be righteous. And so I'm dependent on that breastplate of righteousness, but I'm not dependent on the shield of faith. The shield of faith is for us to block the flaming arrows of the evil one that Satan hurls at us. He is hurling temptations and trials at us, and we have that shield of faith of, God, I know you're in control, and I'm dependent on you rather than me trying to be right. Each part of the spiritual armor, we can do this much later, but each part of the spiritual armor has a role, has a purpose, has a part in the armor. And it is the shield of faith that we need to have faith in God to extinguish the temptations and the flaming arrows that are being hurled at us, not our righteousness and our goodness and what we do is right, but we don't want to expose our hearts. We want to have that shield of faith and depend on God. Here, we need to watch and pray. And the mistakes that the disciples made and the mistakes that I make and that we often make is we depend on our efforts. We depend on our wisdom. We depend on our strength, not God's. So we need to depend on God's strength. Second mistake they made is they took God's deliverance for granted. They said, well, this is going to be the Messiah. He's going to be the one that's going to overtake the Romans, and he's going to be the new ruler. It's going to happen. So as men do, they thought that prayer mattered little because it's going to happen anyway. Hey, well, God's in control. We need to pray. Jesus tells us to pray. We are commanded to pray. Continue to pray. And so we don't need to take God's deliverance for granted. We need to continue to be in prayer to Him, prayer for the situation, to watch and to see and to pray. Lord, help us to be strong in your spirit. Help us to be filled by your wisdom and not our own. Hey, the watch and pray, this needs to be said. Watching and praying, what does that do? That bears a testimony to God. You are giving a testimony on who you depend on, which is God. When men and women watch and pray, they demonstrate that they depend on God. Their dependency on God is well-grounded, well-founded, and it is real, and it's what they do. Is it what we do? Is it what you do? Do you depend on God? Do you watch to see? And do you pray to prepare? They look to God. We need to look to God. So this watching and praying is very serious. We need to stop, watch, and pray so that we may not fall into temptation and give in to the flesh. The flesh is strong. The flesh is strong. The spirit sometimes is willing, but sometimes it's weak. The older I get, when it comes to this topic of staying up and staying awake and trying to do things overnight, these all-nighters I did when I was a teenager or young 20s in college, man, all night, no problem. I could watch movies, play games. I could travel. I could drive. Oh, my goodness. Now, man, there's just no way. I am out. I am useless. If I get really tired, man, that's just forget it. I'm not going to make decisions or do anything late at night. It's over. I mean, lights out. Even if my eyes are open, my brain is not at any top capacity. So it's, man. So my flesh gets weak near the end of the day, and I'm out. I'm just not good for anything. So this makes sense to me that we need to watch and pray. I can't trust on my physical strength. I can't trust on my mental strength without God. I need your strength. The older I get, the more I realize, Lord, I need to depend on you. So we need to watch and pray, because that bears testimony that you depend on God more and more. But hey, what you need to know from this, I know we've been doing this for 17 minutes now. I'm going to wrap this up. I didn't intend to go this long. But what you need to know, that you are never alone. Even when your closest friends neglect to pray for you, neglect to fellowship in the spirit of prayer with you, neglect to give you comfort, even when your closest friends neglect you, you need to know you are not alone. God is with you. He's there. Another thing we need to know is that many trials and temptations, man, they are going to pop up quick and fast and unexpectedly and immediately. And watching and praying is going to prepare you for that. Temptations, I know that a lot of times temptations or even trials, I'm like, man, if I had just known that was going to happen, or man, if I didn't see that one coming. Of course not. But watching and praying will help you prepare to deal with that when it comes. In Galatians 5:17, I have to throw this in here because it is the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Paul even tells in his letter to the church in Galatia, in his letter of Galatians, he says this in chapter 5, verse 17. You may want to have that one, Galatians 5:17. He talks about how the desire of the flesh and this desire to the spirit, they oppose one another. It's a struggle. So here it is. For the desires of the flesh are against the spirit, and the desires of the spirit are against the flesh. For these are opposed to each other to keep you from doing the things you want to do. This is serious stuff. Watch and pray. Watch and pray. Now, we started off this with the hindrance to prayer. It's just prayerlessness was the one that I wanted to harp on tonight. Failure to pray. Hey, a friend of mine, Glenn Myers from Baton Rouge, Zoe Baptist Church. Glenn Myers, a friend of mine years ago, he just in an offhand comment talked about, he gave me some advice for doing some schoolwork. Now, I have applied this with a lot of areas in my life, but it says, man, I don't feel like doing something. I do the 10-minute rule. Glenn said, I'll start something, I'll commit to 10 minutes, set a timer or something, or just mentally look at the clock. And It said for 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, if I'm still in kind of a foul mood and I don't feel like it, I'm not into it, then I stop, take a break, go do something else. But it said most of the time, and I found this to be true, most of the time after 10 minutes of getting into doing a study or whatever he was involved in, most of the time I get in a groove and I just get to going and I go and I'm able to do it and complete it or get through what I need to get through. I've applied that with not just studies. I've applied that with meetings or tasks or work or whatever it may. I have applied that thanks to Glenn. Man, just get it. You don't feel like it, start something, do that 10-minute rule. My dog is barking like crazy. Will you hush, please? Come here. Do the 10-minute rule. Get it going. Now, when prayer, just set aside a time and ask the Lord to prepare you. Read some scripture to prepare you. Start reading Psalms. Start reading the Gospel. Start reading Matthew chapter 26 and say, Lord, my flesh is weak. My mind's not really into this. Lord, change me, fill me, guide me with your spirit to pray. To pray. Get started. Don't just not pray. Get started and pray to the Lord. So tonight, watch and pray, see and prepare, and be faithful. That's a testimony to God. Hey, I love you. Thank you. It's been 22 minutes here, so we're going to wrap this up. Be sure to look at your prayer list and your email when you get that coming, and we'll see you Sunday. See you Sunday. Have a good one. Bye.